It's basically mold inoculated rice. That's like the basis of what it is. Aspergillus oryzae is a mold that's prevalent all throughout Japan. So back in the day when they were doing a bunch of sake production, to get the enzymes to start breaking down the starches in the rice, it used to be a bunch of guys around a bucket and they'd chew the rice and then spit it into a bucket, and then that full bucket would just be a sake bucket to start like fermenting, if that makes sense. A couple hundred years into production, they found that when you inoculate some of the rice with the Aspergillus oryzae, it wasn't as scientific, it just like, it ended up getting contaminated. It grew this like really nice brick of koji, and you can tell the difference between like just rice and mold and the koji because it has this nice like white film over it. It's called the mycelium layer. It's just different molds will grow them. If you ever eat tempeh or anything, that's the same exact type of layer that's growing. It's a whole different mold that's doing it, but that's what's growing around it. The only difference is that we don't want our koji to grow until blocks like that. Aspergillus oryzae is notorious for growing on the outside of things and not like going in deep until it has literally no other source to go to. So you really want to break it up, make it very loose. It's an enzyme source, so similar to beer making, how you'll heat up the barley grains in the mash tun to get them up to a certain temperature to get the amylases and beta amylases working to start breaking down the starches. Koji takes that step for us. So we inoculate the rice, we'll let it all grow. It takes about 24 to 48 hours to grow our koji, for enough for a tote at least. We have to do a couple different batches a month of it. It'll kind of stay dormant until it's needed. So like once there's no more like food source for the aspergillus to like grow on, it'll just kind of chill for a little bit and then we'll add it to our batch. Once we add it to our batch and then we add in like freshly steamed rice, that's been cool to like temperature, to batch temperature I guess I should say. The enzymes will kind of start getting a lot more active because they have more of a food source. So when you're growing your koji, you want to make sure you're growing a koji that's very heavy on the amylase or even sometimes the glucanases. You do want a koji strain that produces protease. You just want to make sure that it's a limited amount of protease because you want the protease for the body of your sake, but if there's too much going on, it'll start creating more off flavors than just the body you're wanting. So you really want a koji strain that's going to ramp up that amylase to make sure that all your starches are going to get converted so your yeast can actually consume them, which is the main importance of koji, because yeast cannot handle these big starch complexes. So you have to break that down into chunks so that the yeast can actually ferment them and consume them and create ethanol and CO2. They create a couple other things, but in small doses. Yeah, and I'm like, my hands are everywhere. I'm like, what do I do with that? Ugh, who's here? Oh, Billy's here in the back.